Found Duckling by EvaDragon. Chapter 27, Apologies and the Dannies. Summary. Dick and Tim talk. Damian and Danny talk. Dan gets set free in Gotham. Clockwork is a cryptic bastard. Congrats, it's triplets. Damian and Tim talk. Timbers, can I speak with you? Both Tim and Danny turn to look at the interloper in a weird synchronous movement. Dick shuddered at the movement. It reminded him of the twins from the movie The Shining, even though Danny and Tim weren't twins. Tim huffed at the eldest bat. What do you want, Dick? We were kind of in the middle of something, Tim said with a slight edge to his voice. Dick couldn't really blame Tim for that edge. He was the reason Tim had that edge to begin with. Dick winced, knowing it was his fault. I just wanted to talk to you, baby bird, Dick replied, holding his hands up in what he hoped was a placating manner. He watched as Danny leaned in close to Tim and whispered something in his ear, and then the half-ghost floated up and through the cave's ceiling. Sorry to interrupt. It was nothing. We were just testing some of Danny's powers. He's got so many that even he doesn't remember what they are sometimes. Plus, he said there have been times when his powers have been shorted out for whatever reason. So we were coming up with ways to make sure he could still protect himself if that ever happened again. Now, what do you want? Tim narrowed his eyes at his eldest brother, wary of interacting with him. Dick had never threatened bodily harm on Tim, but at the same time, Dick had been the one who had taken everything Tim had ever loved away at the time when he needed Dick the most. Tim wasn't about to let that happen again, even if it meant he had to take Danny and run. He would. He already had 12 different contingency plans laid out and ready, and with Danny's ghost powers to aid him, the bats and birds would never be able to find them. Dick led Tim over to the lounge area and sat down. Alfred appeared with a tray of tea and snacks and then disappeared back into the shadows like magic. Dick winced again at the look Tim was giving him and heaved a sigh. He ran his fingers through his hair. It stood on its ends by the time he was done. Tim, do you remember right after Danny had that horrible harpoon incident? Dick started, watching Tim's face intensely. Tim nodded, still eyeing him warily. Dick deserved it. Jay cornered me and Damie down here in the cave and made me realize that I've been an absolutely shitty brother to you. I was too wrapped up in Jason coming back and him being alive, and then Bruce was gone and Damian had just been dropped off, and we were trying to deprogram him from the league, and that's an even shittier excuse. And I'm gonna shut up now. Dick paused his guilt-fueled rambling, but Tim, the little asshole, hadn't stopped it either. Oh no, don't stop on my account. You were doing so well, Tim purred with a shit-eating grin. There was a reason the rest of the bats were worried about Tim going supervillain. Of course, if he did, Jason would be the one handing him the C4, and now Danny would probably be there making him invisible and shit. And Tucker would be the guy in the chair. Not that Tim needed a tech support person, but Tucker would go wherever Danny went, and then add in Sam with her plant powers and Danny. Gods, Danny was just as chaotic as her now twin. Dick shuddered as he realized just how close they'd gotten to unleashing unbridled chaos on the world. Dick finally reached and took Tim's hands in his. "Timmy, I'm sorry. I should have been better. B has said many times that you're just as good of a detective, if not better, as he is. And I knew what kind of home life you had. And I was mad as hell when B took Robin away from me. I come home to find another kid wearing my colors. And B didn't even tell me about it. Then I go and do the same shit to you. Not only that, but I never listened to you when you told me how Damian was trying to kill you or how he would speak down to you and demean you. You're such a strong person, Timbers." Dick was full on crying now. Tim was relishing every minute of it. But Tim was not a cruel person, so he finally took mercy on poor abused Dick. He brushed his hands along Dick's cheeks and wiped his brother's tears away. "I already forgave you, a long time ago. Yeah, sure, I was considering going solo, but you're still my family, and besides, if I had gone solo, I don't think we would have met Danny, or the others. We didn't know it, but they're exactly what this family needed to bring us together." Dick pulled his younger brother into one of his famous octopus hugs, and surprisingly, Tim allowed it. "Thank you, Tim. Thank you." Dick breathed out around his sniffles. "Well, come on. We've got patrol tonight. Danny's been itching for patrol, even if B and I still think it's a horrible idea. But he says that just monitoring from the watchtower isn't enough anymore," Tim said with a clap of his hands as he stood up and headed towards the changing room. "Danny, I wish to speak with you," Damian asked as he saw the half-ghost float through the floor from the cave. He knew that the Haffa had been sparring with Drake, but he had wished to speak with his newest brother alone. He just hadn't had a moment to do so. "Huh?" Danny returned to the visible spectrum and saw Damian waiting for him. "Oh, sure, Damie. What's up?" Damian turned on his heel and led the Haffa to the manor's smaller library. Danny trailed behind the younger boy, thoroughly confused. Damian took up residence in one of the fluffy armchairs and waited for Danny to do the same. A few moments later, Alfred appeared out of the shadows with a small tray of tea and snacks for the two boys. They sat in companionable silence for a few minutes, enjoying their drinks and pre-patrol snacks. "Todd has informed me that I have done serious harm to Drake." Richard seemed to agree with Todd. "But as you are new to the family, I feel you can be objective, and therefore I seek your counsel." Damian spoke softly as he looked at his teacup, refusing to meet Danny's eyes for fear of the judgment he might see there. His hands didn't tremble as he held his teacup tightly. For some reason, he almost feared rejection or judgment from this brother more than anything else. That's a tough question, Damie. Before I answer your question, can I ask some of my own?" Damian nodded. "What was it like when you first got here? I'm not going to judge you or anything. I'm just trying to understand." Damian frowned before setting his cup down. "As you know, Ra's al Ghul was my grandfather. I was trained to be his heir. Everything I did was expected to be met with perfection. Punishments were meted out if I failed in any regard. I trained from dawn till late in the evening, and in many things: weapons, languages, stealth, espionage, assassination. And my punishments, if I failed a mission or training, were harsh. I believe the term blood, sweat, and tears in the literal sense applies here." Danny sucked in a breath. Damian nodded. "I was also raised that bloodlines were the be-all and end-all. Grandfather had 3 children, my mother, my aunt, and my uncle. Yet it was I who was chosen as his heir. Why not my uncle? Why not my uncle's child? Or my aunt's children? but apparently I was the only one of acceptable bloodline. Maybe it had something to do with the fact that I was, quite literally, grown in a test tube, and mother hand-selected my genes, and I was grown in an artificial womb. I do not know, and even if I ask, mother will most certainly lie. Damian took a deep breath and looked up at Danny. So, coming here and seeing your bio dad with a whole bunch of adopted kids was a shock, huh? Danny said, choosing his words carefully. Yes, back in the league, we were taught that to earn our place, it had to be done with blades and bloodshed. I had been taught that Robin was mine by birthright. I attacked Drake because Robin was mine, Damian admitted, swallowing thickly. Robin was originally Dick's, yes? Damian nodded at Danny's question. And how did Dick pass the title down? From my understanding, Father gave it to Todd when Richard and Father were fighting, and Richard took up the mantle of Nightwing. There was a fight over it, if the story I was told is correct. And how did Tim get the Robin title from Jason? Jason was dead when Drake took over. It's part of why Todd called Drake replacement for so long. But Father had gotten severely violent with Todd's passing. Richard refused to work with Father, and Drake knew Father needed a partner to rein him in. Drake forced himself into the Robin mantle. Danny heaved a sigh. Did no one in this family talk about their issues? Fuck. He could sense a pattern, but he still had to ask the next question. And how did you get the Robin mantle? It was given to me by Richard when Father disappeared into the time stream, and we thought him dead. It is my birthright as the son of the Bat, Damian said haughtily. Did Dick tell Tim that he was giving it to you? Damian opened his mouth to retort, but clacked his jaw closed. Richard hadn't told Drake. He'd just given Robin to Damian because Damian had demanded it, because Richard was convinced that Drake was slowly going insane, insisting that Bruce was alive, because Drake had lost so many people in such a short time. Then Drake had gone missing. Then Father had reappeared. And Drake's friends hadn't died but were merely trapped in the future. I am meant to be Batman's partner. It is my birthright, Damian insisted. Maybe, but Robin was Dick's first, which apparently isn't tied to the Wayne name, or Batman specifically. So it shouldn't have been given to you, at least not without talking to Tim about it first. And who says that Batman can't have more than one partner at a time? Danny questioned. Damian drew in a deep breath. Let's shelve that for now. You came here and thought Tim was standing in your way to get what you wanted. What happened? I do not wish to talk about it, Damian admitted, guilt sitting heavy in his stomach. He had thrown Drake off the dinosaur in the cave. He'd cut the grappling line. He tried to have Drake's name removed from Wayne Enterprises as co-CEO multiple times. He'd left Drake alone in multiple rogue fights when he knew that the rogue in question would have been handled better with a teammate. Damian had lost count of how many times he tried to stab Drake with the intent of killing him. Damian felt his cheeks and ears get warm as he finally acknowledged his wrongs. You don't have to talk to me about it, Damie, but I think you can see now how wrong you've been, Danny said softly, reaching out to grab a hold of Damian's hand. Damian let him. I'm new to the family, that much is true, and yes, I've given the family a whole shit ton of trauma, but if you want to talk about it, I'm all ears. Damian's hands shook slightly in the hands of the older boy, but he didn't remove them. Thank you, Danny. How does one apologize for their wrongdoings? If they're really sorry, sometimes the words "I'm sorry" are enough. If you don't feel that's enough for the situation, maybe paint Tim something from your heart. As long as the intent is there, I think he'll understand. Damian nodded as a sudden understanding rushed into his head. Thank you, Danny. I have to inform Father that I won't be patrolling tonight. Be safe since you're still recovering. Then the former assassin disappeared out the door. Danny huffed a laugh at his younger brother and floated back down to the cave, hoping that Dick and Tim were done with their talk. Reports of floating boxes and screams of beware coming from the shipping warehouse on 34th Street. Oracle called over the comms. Phantom groaned loudly. The comms went silent for a change.
Casper, want to share with the class?
Hood snarked. That would be Boxy, or Box Ghost. He's mostly harmless. A menace, but mostly harmless. Is that the one you told me was obsessed with all things square, rectangular, or cubed? Red Robin asked in shock. Yep, that would be him. Everyone on comms groaned in unison. I'm 5 minutes out, Nightwing chirped. I'm close as well. Nightwing should be able to handle Boxy, but I want to be nearby, just in case, Phantom chimed in. Everyone else gave their confirmation, and then Phantom was flying in the direction of the indicated warehouse. The two vigilantes met on top of the neighboring warehouse. Phantom breathed out an icy mist. Nightwing looked at the younger vigilante curiously. That was my ghost sense. Lets me know that we're for sure dealing with a ghost, Phantom explained. Nightwing nodded. Phantom held out his hand for the black and blue vigilantes so that he could phase them both into the building. Nightwing took, and they were both falling through the roof. Beware, I am the Box Ghost. A stocky man with blue skin, a gray shirt, dark overalls, and wearing a beanie yelled out as they came into view. Really? Phantom deadpanned at the ghost and was just so done with his shit. Beside him, Nightwing snickered at his younger brother. Oh, Ghost Child. I did not realize you were here, Box Ghost replied, a frightened look on his face. How are y'all getting out of the realms? I closed the portals, Nightwing demanded. And that's the $1,000,000 question, isn't it, twerp? Said a menacing voice behind the two vigilantes. Phantom let out a noise that was a cross between a squeak and a meep. Nightwing brought out his newly made ghost version of his Eskrima sticks and electrified them. The new ghost looked at the sticks and narrowed his eyes. You gave them anti-ghost tech. The other ghost that looked oddly like an older version of Phantom snarked. This ghost was stockier. His hair was longer and looked like fire, where Phantom's looked like it was underwater. He was taller, almost as tall as Red Hood. His eyes were red instead of green, and the most damning was the stark black cape. When Phantom was in his king regalia, his cape looked like the night sky. Of course I did, Dan. I couldn't leave my family and Frayed defenseless against ghosts and others from the realms because I knew that wherever I went, trouble would follow. Phantom growled back, charging up an ectoblast. Dan stopped in his tracks. Frayed? Family? He asked, confusion clear on his face. Phantom realized that Dan didn't know. He still thought that the Fentons were his family. Maybe, just maybe, if Phantom could explain. The explosion of the Nasty Burger. It never happened. Instead, the Fentons sold me to the guys in white. I was vivisected. There were several sharp intakes of breath through the comms. Nightwing inched closer to Phantom and took his hand. Sam, Tucker, and Jazz got me out, and I fled to Gotham to find my bio family. The Fentons weren't our family? Dan asked in a small voice, folding in on himself. No, we were adopted. And now they're serving their time for everything they've done. One of the Green Lanterns took them to Oa. Phantom patiently explained, hoping beyond hope that he was reaching this other part of himself. And the other fucker? Dan asked in a rough voice. He attacked me here in Gotham, and suddenly I realized that everything bad that had happened, besides me becoming Phantom, like Valerie becoming Red Huntress, the GIW coming to Amity, the anti-Ecto acts getting passed, the $1 million bounty on my head, not to mention all the times you tried to kill Jack, the kidnapping, the assault. He even ended a few ghosts. I used my authority as Ghost King to sentence him to 1,000 years within a nightmare realm via Fright Night. Right, I forgot we were the Ghost King. So what happens now? Dan asked, all the fight drained out of him. It was about that time that there was a flash of light surrounding Dan, and a toxic green sticky note floated down in front of Phantom. Floating in front of them was now a Phantom-sized Dan. He was still stocky instead of a twink like Phantom. The Phantom with the bat logo across his chest groaned as he read the sticky note out loud. Congratulations, it's a boy. All is as it should be. CW. Dan groaned in unison with all of the other bats on the comms. So what, we now have another half-ghost to add to the family? Red Robin asked as he dropped in beside Nightwing and Phantom. Wait, what do you mean another? How many are there? Dan asked, his form settling into a 16-year-old's body. He looked down at his hands and curled them into fists as if he were seeing them for the first time. You would be the third, Red Robin answered. Fucking what? Dan screeched. Oh yeah, you weren't around when the Fruit Loop cloned me. Phantom snickered. Dan looked like he was about to implode. Wraith when she's out. I'm still Phantom. If you want to join us, you can choose a name. Phantom shot a grin at his new/old brother. He was leery about the alternate version of him joining the Bats, but Clockwork was being a meddling bastard again. And Danny knew better than to try and best the Ancient of Time. Your outfit, is different, Dan stuttered out. Yep, Frostbite helped me make it. Who the fuck is Frostbite? Dan yelped. As entertaining as this is, maybe this is a conversation better suited to the cave. Red Robin interrupted before Phantom or Dan could get any further into their existential crisis. Besides, Red knew his brother well enough to know that Phantom loved dropping bombs on others to know where this was going. Red pinched his nose in an imitation of a move he'd often seen Batman doing in reference to Phantom. Sure, tag, you're it. Phantom darted forward and tagged Dan and flew off towards the cave. Dan spluttered a moment before following. They left trails of light in their wake. Nightwing and Red Robin exchanged looks before following at a more leisurely pace with their grapples. Both older vigilantes heard Batman grumble in their ears. Phantom heard it too. But they all ignored his grumbling. His children usually did. Phantom was at least smart enough to take Dan through one of the street entrances to the cave instead of straight to the manor. Wraith, Pharaoh, Chaos were waiting for them when they got to the cave. The rest of the bats joined them soon after Phantom and Dan floated in through one of the access tunnels. Dan looked around the cave in stunned awe. He turned to look at Phantom and pointed at the dinosaur that said, "What the fuck?" And Phantom responded with a gesture that said, "I know, right?" They seemed to be communicating telepathically like actual twins. Dan looked closely at Pharaoh and Chaos as if he could almost but not quite recognize them. Phantom shot a look that promised an explanation. "Phantom," Batman grunted. Phantom merely smiled at his dad. Batman pinched the bridge of his nose. "Short explanation. Clockwork, the Ancient of Time, de-aged Dan and locked him to my age, and basically ordered me to take care of him. That's how you got out, isn't it?" Phantom said, looking at his alternate self. Dan nodded. A round of groans accompanied this. Dan allowed his own transformation rings to wash over him, and they were now looking at Danny as if he'd suddenly developed the desire to do extreme sports or illegal steroids or both. But everything else about Dan was the same. Same color eyes, same color hair, although his hair was longer. His choice of civilian clothing more or less mirrored what Danny wore daily. "Hiya, Dan. I'm Danny. That's Danny with an I." Danny chirped as she transformed back into her human half and floated over to the third halfa. Tucker retracted his own armor and Sam did the same. Dan gaped at both of them. He knew those faces. Jazz emerged from the elevator, and it hit him like a brick to the face that this was truly his family, his frayed, all in one place. Dan shuddered as the frayed bonds between Danny, Jazz, Sam, Tucker, and Danny snapped into place. He knew that it would take some time before the bonds with the rest of the bats formed, but now he had all the time in the world. Danny allowed his transformation to wash over him, and although Dan stood taller than him, Danny rushed to hug Dan. "I'll get started on the paperwork. We'll call Clark tomorrow. Do you have a preference for a name?" Tim asked as he came out of the changing room. Dan considered a moment before looking at Danny. "What are their names?" "She's Danielle Jane and he's Daniel James. They both have mine and Bruce's last names. Drake Wayne," Tim answered. Dan looked deep in thought before he brightened. "Dante Janice Drake Wayne. And what's my cover story?" "At least that part's easy. Danny was given up for adoption at birth. The cover story we came up with for Danny was twins separated at birth. We can just add to that. Say something like it was actually triplets, but your birth was never officially recorded, and then you were stolen from the hospital minutes or hours after you were born. You've been in and out of reform homes, juvenile detention, foster care, etc., until recently when you ran away and made your way to Gotham. That's where you found the old article from the Daily Planet about the Drake Wayne twins and realized that you look suspiciously like them. Clark will be able to spin it so that it's not a PR nightmare," Tim said matter-of-factly. Bruce looked like he was sucking a lemon, but everyone else was laughing at how quickly Tim came up with Dan's cover story. Jason was bent double for how hard he was laughing. Alfred came down to dismiss the group back to their respective rooms, and of course, because Alfred was magic, he informed Dan that he already had a room made up for him, right next to Danny's. "Master Tim, Master Damian has requested your presence in his room," Alfred informed Tim as the bats dispersed either upstairs or back to their own apartments. Tim threw the butler/grandfather a look, but he merely repeated the request. "Demon brat," Tim called softly as he knocked on Damian's door. The door creaked open and Tim gaped at Damian's red-rimmed eyes. Damian's hands snaked out and grabbed Tim's wrist in a vice-like grip, and the younger boy yanked the older boy into his room. Tim let out a small squeak and stumbled a bit at the action. He quickly found his footing and placed his back against the now closed door, eyeing Damian warily. Timothy, after speaking with two of our brothers and reflecting on my actions from the last 4 years, I have found that I have done you a disservice. I have a gift for you, Damian said stiffly as though he were reciting a speech. He turned on his heels and moved to his desk. There he brought out a canvas that was covered with a thin cloth. He brought it back to Tim and shoved it into Tim's hands. Tim took it like it was either about to bite him or poisoned. Both were also possibilities. Tim carefully unwrapped the canvas and gasped in shock. He was looking at one of Damian's paintings. The background was obviously a starry sky as seen from Nanda Parbat. The foreground was Danny in his phantom form leaning against Tim in his Red Robin costume. They were sitting on top of Wayne Enterprises and the rest of Gotham was underneath them. If Tim looked carefully, he could see the words "I'm sorry" in beautiful calligraphy painted into the Gotham skyline. Tears pricked the corners of Tim's eyes as he stared at the painting. "Thank you, Damian," he whispered. He looked up from his gift and carefully placed the painting on the desk. Telegraphing his movements, Tim carefully pulled Damian into an awkward hug. The hug only lasted a few seconds, neither comfortable with prolonged touch from the other. Tim slipped out of Damian's room, hugging the painting close to his chest. Today had been a day chock full of surprises, but both Dick and Damian had apologized. He'd gained yet another brother, and he hadn't been stabbed. He had a slight headache, thank you Danny/Dan, but he could live with that. Tomorrow is going to be one hell of an interesting day. Notes: Dick, Tim, I'm sorry. Tim, blue screens. Damian, Robin is mine. Danny, nope, Robin was Dick's. Damian, I'm the blood son of the bat. Danny, that doesn't mean jack shit. Damian, blue screens. Danny, ancients, this damn family has communication problems. Danny, why can't Batman have more than one partner at the same time? Damian, blue screens. Again. Danny, fix your shit. Oracle, ghost in the warehouse. Phantom, damn it. Nightwing, what the hell? Phantom, oh, that's just Boxy. He's a menace, but he's harmless. Dan, but I'm not harmless. Phantom, bring it. By the way, I'm adopted by the bats. Dan, what? And Vlad? Phantom, taken care of. Dan, so do we, fight or what? Clockwork, nope, he's 16 now. Phantom, ah, fuck. Phantom, by the way, we have a clone. She's cool. Dan, what even is your life? Danny, I have no clue. Tim, he's gonna fit right in.